The pine woods were quiet, and the sky had turned the color of steel. Evening rolled in over the treetops with no ceremony, just a creeping stillness that made the forest feel unnaturally suspended in time. The hollow below, dense with underbrush and ancient trunks, usually buzzed with insect hums and night calls by now. But not tonight. Above the canopy, wings cut the air in near silence. The owl had returned, as it did every dusk. A female, old and broad-winged, known to the local biologists by a faint nick in her left wingtip. She circled above the grove that had been her roost for over 6 seasons. But tonight, something in her movement changed. She didn't descend. She circled once, twice, then hovered briefly above the tallest pine. The branch she always landed on, curved and bare from years of clawed perching, waited still. It barely moved in the breeze. It had been her post for feeding, watching, and sleeping. But now, she wouldn't land. Instead, she let out a short, uncertain click. Not a warning call, not a cry for a mate, just a reaction. Then, she beat her wings again and turned midair, still not landing. A small field mouse down in the leaf litter paused, sensing something overhead. It froze, expecting a dive. None came. The owl kept circling, slower now, head twitching slightly as she scanned the hollow below. Then she rose a little higher and perched, not on her usual tree, but further upslope, on a crooked limb overlooking the entire clearing. She tucked her wings in tight. Her head moved slowly, eyes wide and unblinking. She was listening, watching. Still. Beneath her, the forest waited too. And in the hollow, where roots ran deep and trunks rose like ancient bones, something in the earth exhaled, slow and hidden. No one else heard it, but the owl did. And that's why she did not roost. The hollow had always felt ancient. To a human observer, it might have seemed like any other forest depression, a gentle dip between two ridgelines, overgrown with ferns and soft moss, shaded by towering oaks and hemlocks. But to the animals that lived there, it was more than terrain. It was memory, a shared pulse of safety passed down through generations of nesting, hiding, foraging. But tonight, the forest held its breath. The squirrels were the first to shift. Not frantic, not panicked, just subtly wrong. A mother gray squirrel, usually last to leave her nest hollow, poked her head out unusually early. Her ears twitched, not toward sound, but toward the lack of it. No insects, no night birds, no gentle creak of bough against bough. She climbed down the trunk and paused, nose in the air, tail twitching fast. Elsewhere, a raccoon emerged from its den and immediately froze mid-step. It wasn't startled, it was unsure. The wind, though nearly absent, carried something bitter in its emptiness, something that didn't belong. A young fox, barely into its first season away from the den, crept through the underbrush with unusual care. Normally bold in the half-light, it now moved slower, ears lowered, paws gentle on the cold earth. It was as if the ground itself had changed. A subtle pressure, a waiting. Even the trees seemed different. Their trunks stood still, but without rest. Their branches did not sway. They only trembled very slightly, as if some deep current had shifted far beneath their roots. The owl watched it all from above, unmoving. She saw the prey animals relocate. She saw the scavengers pause. She saw the rodents leave their nests, only to hesitate and double back. And she, the silent hunter of this grove, made no move to hunt. She simply turned her head slowly, from the hollow's heart to the east ridge, and waited, because she knew the forest was listening now, and the hollow was watching back. The silence became total by nightfall. It wasn't the natural stillness of dusk, nor the hush that follows snowfall. This was the absence of the forest's very voice, a silence so deep that even the trees seemed reluctant to breathe. Normally, as darkness folded across the hollow, it came alive with song. Insects buzzing in the ferns, night birds calling from the canopy, frogs croaking from muddy low points, and the far-off chirrup of owls and coyotes. But now, there was none of it. The wind moved like a ghost, barely a whisper, and even it seemed to avoid the center of the hollow. Every sound that should have been came up short, swallowed by the pressure in the air. The usual hum of life had become a vacuum, and the creatures felt it. A lone deer stepped cautiously toward the edge of the hollow, hooves crunching frost-covered leaves. Each step sent echoes farther than normal, as if the sound had no competition. The doe stopped, ears high and wide, nostrils flaring. She sniffed not for predator, but for anomaly, the kind of invisible shift prey animals sense long before anything happens. She didn't stay long. Far above, the owl had not moved from her perch. 3 hours had passed since she first arrived, and she had not left her spot. Occasionally she ruffled her feathers, shifting the frost off her back. Her large golden eyes remained wide and alert, fixed not on movement, but on stillness. The hollow below her had stopped responding to life. No bats skimmed the air. No foxes ran between the trees. Even the insects under the bark seemed absent. It was as if the entire basin of forest had gone dormant, but not from cold, from anticipation, from warning. And still, no one else saw it. No human ear could hear what had been lost, nor what was waiting underneath. No scientist could measure the way the forest withheld itself, like a heartbeat pausing mid-beat. Only the owl, and those who listened like she did, could sense what this silence meant. Because nature is never silent without reason. Something was about to change. The air changed before the wind arrived. It began as a strange heaviness, not a storm cloud or a shift in weather, but something deeper, the kind of pressure you feel in your chest rather than your skin. The forest, already silent, now felt compressed. The temperature held steady just above freezing, but the cold felt heavier, as if the atmosphere itself had thickened. Beneath the canopy, branches began to tremble. Not from gusts. There were no gusts. The movement was erratic. One pine swaying slightly, its neighbor stiff. A twig quivered on the ground, though no leaves around it moved. The animals noticed. The squirrels had long retreated. The fox had curled into a den, head tucked tight. Even insects, those tireless workers of decay, had vanished into bark and soil. And still no sound, no thunder, no storm front, no movement in the clouds. Only pressure. At the edge of the hollow, a man stood still in the clearing. Dr. Aaron Fielding, a forest ecologist, had returned for his final data check before the snow season. He wasn't a superstitious man. He trusted instruments, soil samples, pressure gauges, but even he felt it, a wrongness in the forest. His equipment had begun to behave strangely. The barometric readings jumped unpredictably. His wind vanes spun briefly, then froze. The anemometer, a device he had trusted for years, gave readings of intense gusts despite the stillness around him. He tapped it once, then again. Nothing changed. He glanced into the hollow, that subtle bowl-shaped depression he had studied for months. The tall trees standing at its rim now seemed bent slightly inward, like watchers leaning closer. Aaron frowned. He turned to his field notebook, but stopped when he felt it. A pulse. It came not from the ground, but from the air itself. A single, almost imperceptible wave of pressure, like a breath being held too long and beginning to tremble. The owl, still perched above, tightened her grip. Every animal still awake or alert across the hollow suddenly stilled, as if a cue had been passed through the trees. No one fled, but nothing dared move. Aaron looked up at the trees and whispered aloud, without realizing it. This isn't wind, because storms can be predicted. This felt like something older, something that had been buried. And now it was stirring. It began beneath the soil, not with an earthquake, not with cracking stone or rising smoke, but with a slow, deliberate unweaving, like something ancient shifting under a blanket of roots and memory. Aaron Fielding crouched near the base of an old cedar, scribbling notes with shaking fingers. The wind hadn't returned. The forest was still eerily calm, but the air pressure had not relented. It pressed into his chest, into his ears. He checked his pulse, elevated, his breathing shallow. Then he noticed it. The ground below his boots had moved. Not an inch, not a slide, but a subtle lift, as if the forest floor had breathed in, swelling ever so slightly, too slow for the eye, but not for the instinct. He pressed his palm to the soil. It felt warm. That made no sense. It was late autumn. The surface should have been chilled, frozen even. But beneath the moss, the dirt had retained heat. Not residual warmth, active warmth. Generated. From what? He dug slightly, pulling back a layer of dead leaves and bark. The soil underneath was darker than expected. Damp. Rich, too rich. It hadn't rained in over a week. Nearby, a squirrel skittered up a trunk, paused halfway, then clung tightly, refusing to move again. Aaron stood up, eyes scanning the tree roots. One had shifted, not cracked or broken, but arched, risen slightly from the earth like it had swollen. He moved slowly around the tree's base. Another root was lifting, as if the tree had grown, not up, but out, all at once. He backed away. Overhead, the owl still held her perch, her body unnaturally still. Her eyes were fixed now not on the clearing, but the forest floor. She too had felt it. She too had seen it. Beneath the surface, something had begun to move. Not in chaos, not yet, but in a deep, coordinated uncoiling. And the forest, all around, was watching it happen. It began with a sound no one heard. A rupture in the air itself. Not a crack, not a roar, but a distortion, like a deep breath pulled too sharply through narrow lungs. Aaron Fielding felt it first as a pressure behind his eyes. His vision wavered, not from dizziness, but from something else. Something external. The light through the trees shimmered as if warped by heat, though the air was cold. Then came the shift. A single gust of wind swept across the hollow, impossibly fast and completely silent. The leaves did not rustle. The trees did not sway. Instead, their tops bent suddenly, like being pulled forward by invisible ropes. Not one, all of them. Aaron turned just in time to see the canopy tilt. The wind came down like a hand, flat, wide, and merciless. Not a spiral, not a funnel, a sheer, a crosscut of force, descending vertically as if dropped from the sky. The old-growth trees that lined the hollow's edge, those that had stood for hundreds of years, bowed once, shuddered, then snapped. One after another they fell inward, like dominoes collapsing into a bowl. The owl lifted from her branch at last, wings wide, catching the chaos in slow silence. She did not fly away. She simply rose, high above the falling limbs, as if finally released from a vigil she could no longer maintain. Below, the forest caved. The hollow's floor buckled, not outward, but downward. Roots tore from the soil like skeletal hands. Moss peeled back. Entire sections of ferns vanished into sudden fractures. A ring of trees around the center simply disappeared, swallowed by the violent downward pull as if gravity itself had been inverted. Aaron dove behind a rock outcrop, shielding his head. Splinters flew like knives. Dust filled the air. For nearly 20 seconds, the world was only sound and motion. Then, nothing. Silence again. But not the same silence. This one was mourning. When Aaron finally looked up, the hollow was unrecognizable. A massive depression yawned at its center. Trees lay like fallen giants, some still quivering. The underbrush was shredded, torn away as if by a god's hand. And above it all, high in the still air, the owl circled, alone. She had waited for this. She had known. And now, the forest was changed forever. Dawn broke slowly, almost respectfully. The sun climbed behind a haze of dust and fractured mist, casting pale light over the wounded forest. The hollow, once a quiet cradle of life, was now a gouge in the earth, torn open, reshaped by forces few would ever understand. Aaron Fielding stood at its edge, motionless. His face was streaked with ash and sweat. His hands shook, but not from fear, from awe. The destruction had been precise. Trees that had fallen did not scatter at random. They curved inward toward the exact center of the collapse, their trunks aligned like markings on a clock, as if whatever had pulled them down had a mind or a memory. Moss clung to exposed roots like old fabric peeled from forgotten furniture. Birds dared not sing. Even the insects remained hidden, as though the very rhythm of life had been suspended. Except for one, the owl. She had returned to her perch, the one she had refused to leave the night before. She sat silently, head rotating occasionally to scan the forest below. Her eyes did not reflect fear. They reflected completion. She had waited. She had watched. And now she remained, the lone witness to a transformation no human could explain. Aaron stepped forward carefully, boots crunching over broken bark. His instruments were gone, flung into the underbrush, shattered or lost. But he no longer needed them. No reading could interpret what had happened. Because what fell here wasn't just trees, it was pattern. Something that had pulsed beneath the forest for decades, maybe centuries, a tension, a pressure, had finally released. The collapse wasn't random. It was relief. He looked up at the owl, feeling something ancient in her stillness. Not intelligence, but understanding. She had been part of this. A sentinel. Not warning of danger, but of change. And in that moment, Aaron understood why she hadn't roosted. It wasn't fear. It was reverence. For what was coming. For what had always been beneath. And now, exposed to the light, the hollow would heal. Not return to what it was, but become something new. The owl blinked once, spread her wings, and vanished silently into the pale sky. Aaron watched her go, and behind him, the forest exhaled.